Iran threatens to close Hormuz anew, if U.S. blockade continues. U.S. renews sanctions waiver for countries to buy Russian oil. Trump says he has good news on Iran, offers no clarity on peace deal. Iran threatens to close Hormuz anew, if U.S. blockade continues. Tehran on Saturday threatened to shut the Strait of Hormuz once more if the United States continues its blockade of Iranian ports, hours after the key waterway was reopened in the wake of a ceasefire deal in Lebanon. The resumption of transit had lifted stock markets on Friday and prompted optimism from Washington, with U.S. President Donald Trump telling AFP a peace deal was very close and saying Iran had agreed to hand over its enriched uranium, a key sticking point in negotiations. "We're going to get it by going in with Iran, with lots of excavators," Trump told a gathering of the conservative Turning Point USA movement in Phoenix, Arizona. Iran, however, pushed back on the claim, saying its stockpile of enriched uranium was not going anywhere. It also warned that if U.S. warships interdict vessels coming from Iranian ports, the Strait of Hormuz, a key global artery through which a fifth of global crude oil and liquefied natural gas typically passes, could be closed. With the continuation of the blockade, the Strait of Hormuz will not remain open, Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf wrote on X, adding that passage through the waterway would require authorization from Iran. The opening and closing of the Strait of Hormuz does not take place on internet, it is determined in the field, and our armed forces certainly know how to behave in response to any action by the other side, said Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baqi. What they call a naval blockade will definitely be met with an appropriate response from Iran. A naval blockade is a violation of the ceasefire and Iran will definitely take the necessary measures. The sour notes came on a day that Trump had hailed as great and brilliant, with a series of social media posts praising talks mediator Pakistan and Gulf allies, while telling NATO to stay away as he rejected the alliance's offer to help secure the strait. In his phone interview with AFP, Trump added, "Looks like it's going to be very good for everybody, and we're very close to having a deal," adding that there were no sticking points at all left with Tehran. Oil prices had already been falling on hopes of a negotiated end to the conflict, and the drop accelerated on Friday, with stocks heading upwards as traders drank in the optimism. Late Friday, the U.S. issued another waiver allowing the sale of Russian oil and petroleum products already at sea, a move likely to further soften oil prices as it increases supply. The ceasefire in Lebanon and the reopening of the strait marked key progress in Washington's push for a broader deal to end its war with Iran, after Tehran insisted that halting the Lebanon fighting must be part of any agreement. In Lebanon, displaced families used the 10-day truce to return to homes in bomb-damaged South Beirut and the war-ravaged South. "Our feelings are indescribable, pride and victory," 37-year-old Amini Atrish told AFP, adding that she hoped the ceasefire would be extended. Trump said Israel had been prohibited by Washington from carrying out further strikes. "Enough is enough," he said, adding that the United States would work with Lebanon and deal with the Hezbollah situation in an appropriate manner. The fighting in Lebanon began on March 2, when Hezbollah fired rockets at Israel days after the wider Middle East war began and in retaliation for the killing of Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Separately, the Israeli military said it was lifting wartime restrictions, though Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned that the campaign against Hezbollah was not over. "We have not yet finished the job," he said, adding that a key objective was the dismantling of Hezbollah. Israel warned that military action could resume if the area between the security zone and the Litani River is not cleared of Hezbollah fighters, while Lebanese President Joseph Aoun insisted his country would no longer serve as an arena for outside conflicts. Hezbollah, meanwhile, warned it remained ready to respond to any Israeli violations. U.S. renews sanctions waiver for countries to buy Russian oil. The Trump administration on Friday renewed a waiver allowing countries to buy sanctioned Russian oil and petroleum products at sea for about a month, 2 days after saying it had no plans to do so. The Treasury Department posted the license to its website late on Friday, allowing countries to purchase Russian oil loaded on vessels as of Friday through May 16. The license, part of the administration's effort to control global energy prices that have shot higher during the US-Israeli war on Iran, replaces a 30-day waiver that expired on April 11. It excludes transactions involving Iran, Cuba, and North Korea. On Wednesday, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Washington would not be renewing the waiver for Russian oil and another for Iranian oil, which is set to expire on Sunday. The Iranian waiver, which the Treasury Department issued on March 20, allowed some 140 million barrels of oil to reach global markets and helped relieve pressure on energy supply during the war, Bessent said last month. U.S. lawmakers from both political parties had slammed the administration, saying the sanctions waivers stood to help the economies of Iran while it was at war with the U.S. and of Russia as it was at war with Ukraine. Brett Erickson, a sanctions expert at the consulting firm Obsidian Risk Advisors, said the renewal is likely not the last waiver Washington will issue. The conflict has done lasting damage to global energy markets, and the tools available to stabilize them are nearly exhausted, Erickson said. Russian presidential envoy Kirill Dmitriev had said the first waiver would free 100 million barrels of Russian crude, equal to almost a day's worth of global output. Though the reprieve on sanctions could temporarily boost world supplies of oil, it has not prevented petroleum prices from spiking due to Iran's partial closure of the Strait of Hormuz, through which about 20% of the world's oil and gas transited before the war. The waivers could complicate the West's efforts to deprive Russia of revenue for its war in Ukraine and put Washington at odds with its allies. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, for instance, has said it is not the time to relax sanctions against Russia. Trump says he has good news on Iran, offers no clarity on peace deal. U.S. President Donald Trump said there had been some pretty good news about Iran, suggesting optimism about peace talks to end the war in the Middle East, but he said a ceasefire in the conflict may not be extended without a deal by Wednesday. Iran hours earlier had temporarily reopened the Strait of Hormuz following a separate U.S. brokered ceasefire agreement by Israel and Lebanon, but subsequent statements from both sides left uncertainty over how quickly shipping might return to normal through the global oil choke point. It seems to be going very well in the Middle East with Iran, he told reporters while returning to Washington from Phoenix, Arizona. We're negotiating over the weekend. I expect things to go well. Many of these things have been negotiated and agreed to. The main thing is that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. You cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon, and that supersedes everything else. But in sharp contrast, he said he may end the ceasefire with Iran unless a long-term deal to end the war is agreed before it expires on Wednesday, adding that a U.S. blockade of Iranian ports would continue. The war with Iran, which began on February 28 with a U.S. Israeli attack, has killed thousands and sent oil prices surging because of the de facto closure of the strait, which until recently carried about a fifth of the world's oil trade. Trump has told Reuters there would probably be more direct talks between Iran and the U.S. this weekend. Some diplomats said that was unlikely given the logistics of gathering in Islamabad, where the talks are expected to take place. There were no signs of preparations early on Saturday for talks in the Pakistani capital, where the highest-level U.S.-Iran negotiations since the 1979 Islamic Revolution ended without agreement last weekend. The key Pakistani mediator, Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir, has been holding talks in Tehran since Wednesday. A Pakistani source aware of mediation efforts said a meeting between Iran and the U.S. could produce an initial memorandum of understanding, followed by a comprehensive peace agreement within 60 days. Among complicating factors, Iran's Speaker of Parliament and senior negotiator, Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf, posted on social media that the Strait of Hormuz will not remain open if the U.S. blockade continued. Foreign Minister Abbas Araki had announced on social media that the strait was open for all commercial vessels for the remainder of the 10-day truce that was agreed on Thursday by Israel and Lebanon, which was invaded by Israel after the Iran-allied Hezbollah militant group joined the fighting. Vessel traffic data showed a group of around 20 ships, including container ships, bulk carriers, and tankers, moving through the Gulf toward the Strait of Hormuz on Friday evening, but most ended up turning back, although it was not clear why. The group included 3 container ships operated by French shipping group CMA-CGM, which declined to comment. A cruise ship that was stranded in Dubai, the Celestial Discovery, however crossed the strait and was headed to Oman on Saturday morning, according to marine traffic vessel tracking data. Iran has said all ships crossing the strait must coordinate with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which was not the case before the war. The Defense Ministry said in a statement quoted by state television that military vessels and ships linked to hostile forces, the US and Israel, were still not permitted to pass. Shipping companies have said they would require clarifications, including about the risk of mines, before vessels moved through the entry point to the Gulf. The U.S. Navy warned seafarers that the mine threat in parts of the waterway was not fully understood and said they should consider avoiding the area. It also was unclear how Iran and the U.S. would address Tehran's nuclear program, which has been a key sticking point in peace talks, with Iran defending its right to what it says is a civilian nuclear energy program. Trump told Reuters the U.S. would remove Iran's stockpiles of enriched uranium. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghaei told state TV the material would not be transferred anywhere. Separately, a senior Iranian official said Tehran hoped a preliminary agreement could be reached in the coming days. Oil prices LCOC1 fell about 10% and global stocks jumped on Friday on the prospect of marine traffic resuming through the strait. After a video conference on Friday, more than a dozen countries said they were willing to join an international mission to protect shipping in the strait when conditions permit, Britain said. A senior Iranian official told Reuters there had been an agreement on unfreezing billions of dollars in Iranian assets as part of the accord, without giving a timeline. Who has repeatedly referred to a peace agreement as a deal or transaction, told a rally in Arizona that no money will exchange hands in any way, shape, or form. At last weekend's talks, the U.S. proposed a 20-year suspension of all Iranian nuclear activity, while Iran suggested a halt of 3 to 5 years, according to people familiar with the proposals. Two Iranian sources have said there were signs of a compromise that could remove part of the stockpile. Trump told Reuters the US might not act quickly. "We're going to go in with Iran, at a nice leisurely pace, and go down and start excavating with big machinery," he said in a phone interview. "We'll bring it back to the United States." Despite Trump's optimism, Iranian sources told Reuters that gaps remain to be resolved before a preliminary agreement, while senior clerics struck a defiant tone during Friday prayers. "Our people do not negotiate while being humiliated," cleric Ahmed Khatami said.